The transatlantic slave trade was unarguably the darkest period of human suffering for the African. In 1977, Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe wrote an essay titled An Image of Africa, Racism in Conrad's Heart of Darkness. It was a response to Heart of Darkness, an 1899 novella by Polish-British novelist Joseph Conrad. In the introduction of that piece, Achebe said something which I will quote as the beginning of this story. In the fall of 1974, I was walking one day from the English department at the University of Massachusetts, the parking lot. It was a fine autumn morning, such as encouraged friendliness to passing strangers. Brisk youngsters were hurrying in all directions, many of them obviously freshmen in their first flush of enthusiasm. An older man going the same way as I turned and remarked to me how very young they came these days. I agreed. Then he asked me if I was a student too. I said no, I was a teacher. What did you teach? African literature, I said. Now that was funny, he said, because he knew a fellow who taught the same thing, or perhaps it was African history in a certain community college not far from here. It's always surprised him, he went on to say, because he never had a thought of Africa as having that kind of stuff, you know. According to Achebe, by this time, he was walking much faster. Oh well, I heard him say finally behind me, I guess I have to take your course to find out. The course to find out about Africa is a road that's traveled by many on the global stage. But for us here as Africans, this is our duty and no one will do it better than us. Because like we say in Africa, the story will always glorify the hunter until the lion himself learns how to write his own story. To begin this journey, I set off for Badagry, Lagos State, Nigeria, a border town that holds a special place in Africa to trace the historical antecedents of Africa's migration story. So I'm standing right here in front of the Badagry Slave Museum in Badagry, Lagos State, Nigeria. This place represents the saddest part in African history. For 3 centuries, more than 13 million Africans were captured live from different parts of Africa and transported to different countries, especially in the Americas, where over 10 million of them were put. Well, here with me, I'm going to speak to the museum guard, Mr. Hundei, who is going to take me through this place and to recount the very terrible tales that have taken place in this place. Mr. Hundei, thank you very much and welcome.
Nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
Yes.
So tell us what this place represents and why.
This compound was established around 1863. Though the building of the museum itself happens to be a monument. So a monument is a place where historical artifacts are kept. So the place was converted to a museum in 2002 by the former governor and then the present president of Nigeria. The essence of the museum is to recount what has happened in the past, because there's a popular saying that states that if you don't know your past, then you are ill-equipped to deal with the future.
Well, I'm going to leave you there, but that's a very critical and important saying that you've just said here. If you don't know your past, then you are ill-equipped for your future. Mr. Hundei, thank you. To understand and have a first-hand experience of what the slaves went through, I took a walk through the very route to the journey of no return in Berefo Island. In Badagry, first they captured Africans from towns and villages across the continent, gathered them at the slave markets where they were sold, and then moved across this water to the slave island, where they walked through a dangerous forest in chains, both on their neck, on their hand and sometimes on their waist, the shoreline for the journey of no return. Hi, how are you? Can you help us? How much is the coconut? Okay, let me have some. What's your name? What? Elijah. Elijah or Elijah? Elijah. How old are you? You're 10. Is that your sister?
Okay, it's true.
It's interesting to say that we've been walking for the past 20 minutes, right from the shoreline here, and we are yet to get to the very point of no return where the slaves stood. This indeed tells you how deep the transatlantic slave trade was and how frustrating. But again, Mr. Hunde, while the slaves are walking from that place down to the point of no return, how were they walking? Can you give us another coconut?
They walk with chains, both the neck, the waist, the legs, and their hands, and then they'll be attached to one another. So even with the
all
chains,
the distance for the past 20 minutes I've been walking.
Yes. So then that's why they walk very slowly. You see the way they're walking, because they walk with so much pains around their body. So they walk very slowly. So it takes them days before they can even get to the point of no return.
Wow.
They walk half naked. They walk without shoes on. They walk in the sun. They walk in the rain.
Inside the ship, about 10 to 15 or 20 slave masters can be inside the ship, controlling about 100 or 200 or 500 slaves at times. So because of the number of the slave can overtake the ship and then attack the masters. So that's the reason why the African chiefs, the Europeans came to meet the African chiefs and asked for what can be done. So the chief now brought an idea that, okay, they should dig a well because the slave might have been inside the barrack room for days. Then they may look very tasty. So they dig the well, then they force the slave to drink water from the well. The person that fetched the water out for the slave is an African chief priest. So the chief priest starts some incantation inside the water and then give the slave the water from the well to drink. So after drinking, the slave, they become weak. The sense for them to fight, even to revolt, to rebel inside the ship, will no longer be there anymore.
The transatlantic slave trade is wrought with untold stories of myth. One of them is the attenuation well, still located in the slave island here in Badagry, Nigeria. This spirit well, according to legend, was established to erase the memories of captured slaves as a final drink before heading into the ship. This well was used by slave traders and played a significant role in the slave trade. Legend and history have it that the attenuation well was a magical well with magical powers which erased the memories of people who drank from it, the slaves. African slaves were then compelled to drink from it as a key part of their journey of no return, so as to lose their memories of home, take away their consciousness, and cut their psychological ties with their origin and become loyal to their masters forever. Through the spirit or attenuation well, it became difficult for the slaves to revolt or fight their masters during the trip because there were cases where they outnumbered the slave masters, who were usually not more than 10 or 20.
They use wealth of Africans to develop their country. So look at the likes of Bristol City as a very good example. 100%, 80% of the wealth of the money that was used to construct Bristol City, they are the things they gain from the transatlantic slave trade. And that place was built around 1894.
It has taken us approximately 30 minutes or more to walk from
the Bereful Island, from the jetty.
Okay.
From point of no return jetty down to the point of no return itself.
Where slaves will walk with chains on their legs, waist and hands and necks for days and then arrive here at the slave port, where they are bundled into waiting ships and moved to Europe and the America. Ahmed Adesonya is a professor of history at the Department of Linguistics, African Languages and Communications Arts at the Lagos State University. In his opinion, while the transatlantic slave trade had a negative effect on Africa, it came with its own benefits.
We all know what happened during the slave trade. It affected Africa very negatively. Although at the end of the day, it also helped. We cannot overlook the advantages of slave trade, despite its terrible hazard. Because those people that went, they learned so many things over there, and later some of them were returned, and we have so many innovations, so many developments. For instance, the person that actually actualized the writing of Yoruba is a slave who was captured and returned. Ajayi Crowther, we have heard about him. He was a Christian. When they came back, they started by the translation of a Bible from English to Yoruba, and then today we have the Bible in Yoruba. Not only the Bible, reading and writing. People started to learn how to read, how to write, and then a lot of development came with slave trade. We have a lot of their, technology in form of modern building and so many other things.
The significance of the transatlantic slave trade was not just that it led to the loss of millions of lives and the departure of millions of people who could have contributed immensely to Africa's future. Although the population did have a great impact, but just as devastating was the fact that African societies were entirely disrupted by the trade and increasingly unable to follow an independent path of development that matched its own society and environment. Colonial rule and its modern legacy has been a continuation of this very disruption. The devastation of Africa through the transatlantic slave trade was accompanied by the ignorance of some historians and philosophers to negate its entire history. These ideas and philosophies suggested that, among other things, Africans had never developed any institutions or cultures or anything else of any worth, and that future advances could only take place under the direction of the European or by European institutions, which of course is not true.
So Africa would have been better, even times 10 better than the way it is now, even than Europe, if not for the transatlantic slave trade. Because most of the things they used to develop Africans, they were some of the things they gained from, develop Europe are some of the things they gained from Africa. For example, we have gold in Africa before the arrival of the European. We have ivory in Africa before the arrival of the Europeans. So they use all those things to develop their own country as well. Let's use the case of Bristol City as a very good example. All the things that they used to build Bristol City are what they gained from the transatlantic slave trade in the year 1894. So actually to tell us that Africa has been better, times 10 better than Europe, if not for the transatlantic slave trade, sir.